in conversation with Colleen Hildebrand. Colleen is a lifetime resident of Louisiana who earned a BA degree in secondary English education from the University of New Orleans and an MA in English with an add-on certification in gifted education from Southeastern Louisiana University. With over 30 years of teaching experience, Colleen is also a self-taught artist who loves losing herself in the creative process. The Eater, a memoir of Holding Space, is her first book. And on today's episode of Auto Interview, it's my utmost pleasure, joy and excitement to have on the show today, Colleen Hildebrand. Welcome on the show, Colleen.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you for having me.
I'm so excited to have you on the show today. I haven't read a bit about In the Eater, a memoir of Odin Space. I'm quite excited that, we are here to sit and talk about the book. Thank you so much for coming on and for accepting the invitation.
Well, thank you for taking a look at the book and finding something that I hope is worthy of your time in it.
Yeah, thank you so much. So, Colin, I need to first say that I found the description page of your book in the heater, A Memoir of Holding Space, to be quite pulling, overly compelling, and extraordinarily emotional when I read through it in Amazon. And I would like you to tell us about how you decide to write in the heater. What is the most pulling factor of your inspiration to finally to sit down, write the book in Dick's emotional and engrossing manner? What inspired the making of the book particularly?
Well, I always knew I would write a book, and the fact that I wrote this particular one is surprising even to me because I thought I would write poetry.
Oh wow.
However, I waited basically my whole life to begin writing. I've been so busy teaching, and it seems like everything I write is an assignment for students, and I read so much.
Wow.
So it wasn't until my own children were near adulthood that both I began to find the time and the story. So
Hmm.
my youngest daughter, Abby, began a relationship with a young man who I did not approve of at all when they met. And she was a senior in high school, about to be 18 years old. And for as much as I discouraged the relationship, he was 22 years old when she was still 17, and he was a US Marine. So to me, he seemed like the worst idea in the world. And he also lived in California because he was stationed on a base there. In fact, he wasn't even in California at the time. They had met as he was coming home from deployment online. So to kind of cut to the chase of the story, they did end up dating for quite a while, and toward the end of that first year of their relationship, he was arrested in a blackout episode of PTSD that was indeed alcohol induced. And by that time, at almost 19 years old, she was not equipped to withstand what would become the rigors of a relationship with a man who. So after they
And
broke
how do
up,
you not approve? How you do not approve of their relationship, which I love hearing about. I would love to talk
yeah,
about
I did
later.
not approve. He was a hard living, foul mouthed, pretty boy Marine, and
Hmm.
I wanted her to have nothing to do with him at first. And then, of course, I met him and things changed. So as their relationship progressed, I grew to like him and to understand him and knew that he was from a very difficult background,
Wow.
probably the most difficult background of anyone that I knew personally. Certainly I've heard of worse tragedies in people's lives, but I didn't really know anyone who had suffered through so much as Ryan had.
Hmm.
So at the end of that first year of dating, he was arrested,
Hmm.
and their relationship could not survive that. He had already lost his mother at the age of 15 years old to a very violent death.
Hmm.
And I met him actually when he came to Louisiana from California to arrange his father's funeral. Right after Abby and Ryan started dating, his father passed away. So, of course, my heart softened toward him just through learning about what he had survived already. And then when he was arrested, Abby asked me to be a mother to him. And I tried to step into that role as much as I could. And I saw how receptive he was to any advice, to any good intentions that I could send his way. That he really, over the course of his incarceration, which was about 3.5 years of a 5-year sentence, I thought of him as a son. You know, we grew very close. I wrote to him weekly through email when he was able to receive it. And a lot of those emails, as well as handwritten letters, which I sent about once a month, are in the book. And I began writing the book, which was your original question, when I recognized how rare what I was seeing was. How, although both Abby and Ryan had come from very different backgrounds, she was, even after they broke up, becoming a better person because of her love for him.
Hmm.
And I saw the willingness on his part to do what people now refer to as that hard work of self-excavation in discovering the root of all of his difficulties and assessing his life. And their relationship truly seemed like some sort of calling to me, and I wanted to document it. And truth be told, one of my primary reasons for writing this book was so that they could have a record of all of these outrageous things that had happened to them in order to make sense of it, in order to look back and read it. So I truly did write it for both of them.
Wow.
And if I'm being incredibly honest, I wrote it in the hopes that they would find one another again at the end of the ordeal.
Oh, wow. Well, there's so many thoughts that was running through my mind while you were speaking. So many of it. First of all, I need to commend you to have been able to find inspiration in this most uncommon way of to have been able to sit there and observe the pain of other person and make a story out of it. Yeah, that's quite commendable from first feedback that I'm giving, which of course sounds to me like a lovely introduction to becoming a writer. Another thing I wanted to ask you was the book particularly dedicated to him? Was the whole story based off a real life experience, or there's a mix of fiction or reality in it? It just popped up in my mind, and I thought I should ask you.
The book is dedicated to both Abby and Ryan, and it is 99.9% true. There
Wow.
is one lie in the book, and I chose to leave it in there because it was part of what would have been the manuscript of a book inspired by true events. And that was what I originally conceptualized this as. It was going to be fiction inspired by, Ryan and Abby's story. As I was writing it, I sent passages of it to Ryan while he was in prison. And I sent him one. He was missing a front tooth when Abby and Ryan met. Um, it had been knocked out in a very unglamorous way. I believe he had hit it on the bumper of a truck after, a little skirmish of some sort. But in the story that I was intending to be fiction, I created this scenario where he was playing with a friend's pit bull puppy and having a tug of war with a rawhide in his mouth with the dog, and the dog rips it out. And I could absolutely see him getting into a situation. He was the most unbelievable person I have ever met. So it sounded totally realistic for something that he would do. And I sent that to him, and he wrote back to me saying that he loved it and that it was the first time he truly laughed since he had been arrested. So, kind of in a little nod to alleviating all of the heaviness of his experience, I left that part, that one paragraph about the tooth in the book, and that is not a true story, but it was worth it to me. And he agreed. He said, "Yeah, let's leave that in there. That's so much better than how I really lost it."
Wow.
So that is the one falsehood that I have in the book. Now, there are other moments, especially regarding my life, because the book is a combination of Abby and Ryan's story, the letters Ryan and I exchanged, a few other writings that Abby contributed,
Yeah.
and my own story. Because what I found was that in order to truly tell this story, to understand Ryan in real life, what I had to do was bring myself back to some of the most difficult times
Right.
of my own life.
Mm,
Um, I believe that's how one develops the empathy required to hold space.
mm,
If you forget what you've been through, who you have forgiven, who has forgiven you and why, and I think that you can become very callous. And I was very convicted of my initial judgment of Ryan, of not wanting Abby to have anything to do with him. Although I think at 17 and 22 and the distance involved, and Ryan was quite a personality, rather party boy type. So I think I was somewhat justified in my motherly protection of my daughter. But
uh,
in getting to know him, I just shed, I think, as much judgment as I possibly could. And it required my going back to some difficult times in my own family.
mm.
So that is indeed what I did. And it's mostly true, except for that one little part.
Yeah, I love your take on this. It sounds to me, come across to me as an emotional ride, as a wonderful story, as a pulling one, family dynamics, conversation and stories from daughter to, daughter's boyfriend to personal story and a lot of it, yeah. Thank you so
Yeah.
much for sharing. And now I wanted to ask you, because you did mention you had to act a bit of some of the things you've been to personally that are quite very hard. I wanted to ask you, why did you begin with your father's death and thoughts on grief?
Well, um, as I said, I met Ryan for the first time after he and Abby had been talking for about 6 months. He was in California and she was here. They had met only once over a span of a week or so in person, and they maintained that long distance relationship.
Mm,
He came in town for his own father's funeral. So, knowing that this, and coincidentally, I kind of don't believe in coincidences,
yeah.
but coincidentally, his father passed away the day after Abby's 18th birthday, which also happens to be my birthday. She was born um, on my 29th birthday.
Mm,
So all of these things coincided. And I felt that in order to explain first Abby's willful, rebellious, unique personality, I had to begin with something she had done at my dad's funeral.
mm,
And then almost subconsciously, I think I knew it was the right place to start with the meditation on grief because although he had not been diagnosed with it yet officially, Ryan was diagnosed with PTSD once he was arrested. I mean, I think people would say, oh, of course, now there's so much known about trauma, childhood trauma in particular, and PTSD, of course, in the military, but then just complex PTSD from life.
mm,
So, knowing that he had lost his mother at such a young age and been the one to discover her, I knew that was something that was at the core of so much of his personal struggle.
mm,
So I felt that it was necessary for me to go back and examine some of the things that positioned me to understand him. And that was not only my father's death, it was also my brother's, which was 13 years prior to my father's. My father passed away of a massive heart attack
wow.
shortly after he had jogged 5 miles. So he was
Wow.
the picture of health at 61 years old. And then something like that happened.
Wow.
But 13 years prior to that, we lost my brother on his 24th birthday
No.
to drowning. Literally, he was out on a birthday trip with a group of friends and don't know exactly the details of the circumstance, but they were on the water very late. And we got that phone call that no one wants. And we're told that my brother was missing. His body was missing for 3 days before we found
Wow.
him. And that was an incredible, difficult time for my family.
Wow.
So, beginning with a meditation on loss and grief, while it might not make for enjoyable reading for a lot of people, I think it's insightful. And I think that sharing stories such as that
Yeah.
is an avenue to connection. Our culture doesn't do a very good job, and I don't know if it's worldwide or if it is unique to American culture, but I feel like we do not really allow that space for people to grieve, honestly. We're
Mm.
made to feel as though it's personal. We have to get over it. We shouldn't show it in public. And no one would admit to these things to anyone who has lost someone, but there's just this feeling around it that there's a time and a place, and that time and place is not really in the public eye. So I thought beginning with something that might initiate some thoughts, productive thinking
Yeah.
on why that is and how we all carry this with us. We all lose. It's the one inevitability.
Mm.
We will all face loss or however we encounter it, whether it's through someone moving away or through death itself. We need to be able to have conversations about it. So that's kind of why I began there. Um, it is the window through which I gained a better perspective of Ryan and hope to provide one for others.
Yeah, I'm so sorry to know that you've been through that trunk load of experiences with grief, having to lose your brother to drowning, your father's death, and quite a lot of other things mentioned. It must be a huge roller coaster of emotion for you, really.
Oh, Peter, you have no idea. Those are the two of three very significant losses in my life.
Wow. So sorry to hear about that. And thank you
And
for
there are
sharing
lots
as
of
well.
others, but
I
those
think
are
it's
the ones that I carry.
actually a very fun thing that I even have to include that in the book. Yeah. It's
Yeah,
impressive. Yeah. Very impressive.
thank you.
I'd also like to ask you, Colin, how has the book become more through after its conclusion? Also, what was the most overly pulling section to write in this book? And how are you able to cope with the emotions associated with writing it? Curious.
Well, um, it'll be difficult to talk about this without giving too much away, but I'll start by saying that when I concluded the book,
Yeah.
the most difficult section was the final chapter. I wrote it as the events in real life unfolded. I mean, I had a very good head start. I had about a year's worth of experience seeing them, getting to know Ryan, watching their relationship evolve into, or rather from a romance into one of the most genuine friendships that I have ever seen.
Mm.
So I was writing to catch up to where we were for a very long time. And even in that, the writing process, it might seem like it is easier to write a true story because you know what happened. But on a writerly note, um, knowing what to include, what to leave out, how to condense things for the sake of space in the book and to hold the reader's interest, and where to elaborate, those were very difficult decisions.
Mm.
So as I caught up to real time, it was over the pandemic in 2020. Actually, I finished it on July 5th, late. Actually, it was the early morning of July 6th, early morning, that I concluded it. And that last chapter was the most difficult because at that point, I had told the story. And the very first line of my book is, listen, I'd like to tell you a story, but you should know from the beginning, I don't know how it ends.
Mm.
And that
Wow.
was so true. And it remained true, which is how the book has become even more true after its conclusion, because I thought I had ended it with my 40th chapter, which caught us up to real time. And as I wrote it, I say in the book, I'm sitting here in tears
Mm,
over something so common and so ridiculous that I almost feel foolish writing it. It was simply that a romance didn't work out. My daughter broke up with a young man and they weren't back together. Why did this affect me so deeply? I have an older daughter. She has had boyfriends. They have broken up. I was fond of them. Abby, prior to meeting Ryan at almost 18, had other boyfriends.
mm,
It was never a problem. You're kind to them, cordial, get to know
yeah,
families.
yeah,
And then you accept that this is just part of the growing process. They move on. Ryan was different. When they were still not back together after this 4.5 year ordeal,
yeah,
I and he was released from prison by that point. He had been released in 2019, just prior to the pandemic.
mm,
Um, I felt like I think I used the phrase, it was a miscarriage of hope to conclude the book with them living their separate lives, both in different relationships, albeit rocky relationships. And I still had hope that maybe even after I conclude this book, maybe even this book will serve that purpose of bringing them back together. Because to
mm,
be honest, when I finished it, and Abby and Ryan had access to it as a Google Doc the entire time, and he read what I would send while he was in prison. And then when he was released, he would keep up with my writing, and I have his comments on the document to this day before it went to the editors and was more formalized as a manuscript. Abby began reading it when I finished it, and he texted me and full of emojis, happy face, shocked face, and he says, "Oh, she's reading it." And he's like, "I can't wait to see what she says." And
mm.
they were in touch, and I was very hopeful at the conclusion. But the most difficult part was chapter 40. In that moment, knowing that this is over, I've written the book, I've told the story I've wanted to tell, and yet nothing has changed. They're still not back together. I
Wow,
suppose a lot had changed, though, particularly for Ryan.
wow,
His resilience. Most people don't go into jail and come out a better person, but Ryan did. He
wow,
was absolute magic in his willingness to go deeply into himself and be honest. And his whole goal every day in life was just to be a little bit better today than he was yesterday.
oh,
And
wow.
I can say that that's absolutely how he lived.
Very
He
astounding.
truly had something miraculous about him.
Yeah,
And I suppose I might be giving just a little bit away in my verb tenses here because I've been speaking in the past tense. And I'll just say that the hardest part of the book to write was the epilogue, which I added a year and a half after completing it. And I'll leave it at that as to not give too many spoilers, but the epilogue was most definitely the most
wow. In the heat,
hard part to write.
in the heather sounds like a pulling, overly emotional ride. And I need to say thank you for sharing all of the stories. And I'm hoping that Harvey and Rayan would even see this interview after it has been published, hopefully.
Well, Abby will. Abby will definitely be able to see it, and I have a feeling that Ryan probably will too. Um, I don't,
Yeah.
I
Now,
don't
I'd
think I'm
like,
giving.
absolutely. Now, I'd like us to talk a bit. I know we've been mentioning quite a bit about what the book is all about, the characterization and things like that. But also I'd like you to mention a bit or touch gradually on on some of the overarching themes in the book. Would you like to share
Okay.
with us some of the overarching themes and subject lines in the Eater?
Okay. Well, I think the most prominent theme, which I introduce in that first chapter, is the idea of letting go or acceptance. I see them as synonymous, but letting go ultimately through loss. as I experienced when I began with my father and my brother's deaths,
Yeah.
or letting go of control as a parent once your children become young adults. I think all of that, letting go in multiple ways, is a huge part. And I thought it was a lesson that I knew. And then again, it became even more true upon its conclusion.
Wow.
Another one is something that I have believed for years. Everything is connected. I truly don't really believe in coincidences. I
Mm.
recognize that events coincide, and the psychologist Carl Jung called it synchronicity. And I am a big believer in all of these seemingly random events coming together in meaningful ways.
Mm.
And we call it coincidence, but really it's simply more of events that coincide to make us aware of something. Or
Mm.
if it's not to make us aware, it's to serve as a little nod, I think, from heaven, from the other side, from God, from the universe, however you want to phrase it. But I think that sometimes it's just a little wink saying, I see you, keep going, you're on the right path, or we know what's happening. I'm
Yeah.
a big believer that our lost loved ones, the dead, are always with us. And the American poet Andrea Gibson said recently in an interview that she believes that art is always created by the dead through us, and we just don't know it. And I understand now that it was the loss of my brother
Mm.
that made room in my life for Ryan. And
Wow.
I know that it's the presence of Ryan in my life that will continue to change me and prepare me for whatever is coming next. Of course, along with so many other wonderful people from whom I've learned my whole life, but all of it is connected. And then a third theme, I think, is simply the idea of unconditional love, um, overcoming judgment, developing empathy, confronting yourself, seeing the bits of brokenness within yourself in order to not only heal yourself, but to help others heal, or at least, as the title says, to hold space for others while they're in that process of healing without interfering, without trying to fix them or save them, because part of that love is knowing I can't save anyone. I
Mm.
can be there and help you through it. I can support, but no one can save anyone else from themselves or from anything at all. But
Abs-
we can be supportive of people on their journeys when they're trying to save themselves.
Yeah.
So those are my themes, I think. Letting go, everything is connected, and unconditional love.
Wow. I love your take on that. I mean, I've been enjoying your conversation and your answers to this question so far since the start of the
Thank
interview. It
you.
seems to me to be quite very pulling, quite emotional, overly great. And I need to say thank you so much for even taking the time to accept the invitation to come up and have a conversation around in the ether. Before I
Well,
proceed,
thank
I would
you.
like you to show the book to the camera just so we'll see what it looks like. Beautiful cover you've even got in there. Oh, I love the
Thank
simplicity
you.
of it.
Thank you. Yeah.
Color choice as
So,
well.
so the threads here are representative of the etheric chords that
Mm.
my father would, when we were young, he believed that we're all bound together, those we love, and bound to God, to creation, through these silver cords that are rather unseen in the ether. So that's where the title comes from. And then the moth, multicolored moth, is based on a conversation Ryan and I had. So, and something that he said in a letter to me, and it's my own artwork, so I'm proud of it. And my daughter, who is a graphic designer, also helped to create the digital format for it. My older daughter, Jenna, not Abby. Although Abby did write the back cover. She
Oh,
sent
wow.
my publisher had, of course, prepared something, and Le Bouvier is my publisher. very boutique, very small little operation.
Wow.
And when she sent it to me, I liked it, but I said, actually, my youngest daughter has written something that I would love for you to take a look at. And when she read it, my publisher read it, she was like, "Oh, this is perfect. We are going to use this."
Wow.
So, so it's a very, very unique book in that while it was published more traditionally, I had so much creative control, and I know that isn't every author's experience.
Yeah.
So I'm very grateful to have found Le Bouvier, which is right here in New Orleans, and that was yet another coincidence that I found them.
That's
So and
great.
that was
Yeah.
after a few rejections, quite a few rejections. So
And this is one of the reasons why sometimes I love to let authors talk about the making of their book cover. Because I know that with each book covers, there's some message imbibed in it. As simple as it may
yeah,
look like, as easy as it may sound, there are certain things that are in book covers that are particularly, dear to the author or to the artist. Just like we
right.
have in books, we have in sculptures, we have in art, the signs like this are part of storytelling. I like the fact that you have to tell us a bit about what those chords means and how it's something your father make things like that, and how you have to talk about the map as well to tell you that all of these things
Yeah,
are significant, important to you as a writer. More reason why I love to always
yeah,
ask author, would you like to talk about the making of the cover? Because I know that information itself in covers. Even myself as a writer, there are informations in my book cover. From the book cover, I would tell you I could spend like 5 minutes explaining what the book cover entails, what it's all about. I'll be like, okay, from here to this side, this is what you're trying to do. This is a character, this is things. So I love that question, talking about the making of a book cover. And thank you so much for mentioning that. I mean, it strike a chord, and it's something that I think it's well important for the preservation of family stories, for the preservation of things that have gone far beyond us. I think it's an important thing you've done. Thanks for
well,
sharing.
thank you. You're
Yeah,
welcome.
yeah. And I would also like to ask you, what kind of feedback have you gotten so far ever since the book was published? I would like to also hear what some readers or mothers have particularly said about the book.
Well, the book came out in September of 22, so I've gotten quite a few reviews, most of them favorable. You know, there's always that one person on Amazon who's going to give it a one or a two, but that's okay.
Yeah, everywhere.
Overall, it's probably a disgruntled former student.
Once
I don't know.
Dallas.
But you learn to take all of that with a grain of salt. The feedback that I have personally received through both conversation, a lot of Instagram messages from complete strangers. I think while I appreciate everyone who is a part of my life, who has read it, and coworkers, former students, and they've reached out personally to me. I adore them for reading it, and I'm so thankful to them. But there's just something about receiving a letter from a stranger, whether it's through email or a message on Instagram. And one mother who was in Australia message sentencing for assault,
Wow.
excuse me, which is what Ryan was arrested for, assault on a police officer. And she had recently read my book, and she was sitting there waiting to hear what her son's sentence would be. And she had peace about it
Wow.
because of Ryan's story. That was incredibly moving to me,
Very
that it could
moving.
offer somebody some comfort facing such a difficult challenge.
Yeah.
Um, I also have a local newscaster in New Orleans. I was on her show actually. She invited me on, and she is the mother of five girls.
Oh, wow.
Three of them are triplets. And
Wow.
she said that she believes reading my book has prepared her to be a better mother in ways that she would never have thought of on her own.
Mm,
Just recognizing the uniqueness of each child's personality because my two girls are night and day. They are both brilliant and loving and kind people, but the details of their personality couldn't be more opposite. So with five of her own, she said she really appreciated that aspect of the book. And then, of course, there's this entire military story that unfolds. When Ryan was arrested, he was in the Marines. And of course, he was discharged. And I'm thankful to say that although he was discharged with an other than honorable record, he ultimately had it upgraded upon his release from prison.
mm,
So there's this thread of military and incarceration, and then the absolute resilience that he experienced upon being an inmate firefighter in California, which has such a horrific fire season, the wildfires on the West Coast out here.
wow.
And I've heard from a handful of people who I don't know, but who knew Ryan
Oh,
and who were very complimentary of my depiction of him, my authenticity in capturing his personality,
mm,
and also just in presenting his story as one of resilience and one that we can learn from.
wow.
So the feedback, not only from moms, but from general readers, has been overwhelmingly positive,
Mm,
and I'm very grateful for that, both on Amazon and on Goodreads. I'm quite pleased to see that I have some very kind and thoughtful reviews.
that's great, really. Congratulations on that. Thank you. I wouldn't know if you would like to read a short section of the book to the audience, a
I could.
outline,
I could
paragraph,
do
or even a page if
so.
you like to.
Actually, I think I might begin. I might begin with the author's note.
Let's do
So
that.
I added two parts to the book upon having finished the manuscript proper
Yeah.
that exists almost identically to what it was
Oh,
in 2020. And then I added an author's note and an epilogue um, just prior to publication. So I'll read the author's note. Excuse me for putting on my little nerdy reader's glasses.
mm,
This is a story I'm honored to tell for many reasons. Though I've combined multiple events into single occasions for economy, changed a detail or two for anonymity, and have likely fallen victim to the subjectivity of memory, I've presented the years from late 2015 to 2021 as we lived them. Additionally, I've changed the names of all characters other than Abby, Ryan, Scott, Jenna, Peter, Blair, Ashlyn, and Dion. In truth, this memoir has a very specific audience, my daughter Abby and her former boyfriend, Ryan. I wrote it for them as each searched for meaning in the events that began to unfold in November of 2016. I thought I could help them make sense of it all, help them find themselves, and, if I'm being honest, help them find each other again. That was my hope. I began writing in May of 2017. By then, I knew I was witnessing something uncommon and meaningful. Without realizing it, I was already several thousand words into a draft because of the emails and letters Ryan and I exchanged up to that point. When I finally chose the title in 2019, after a phone conversation he and I had about all of these Creighton anticipated current relevance, which still confounds me. The body of the text from the first to final chapter exists as it did when I completed the manuscript in 2020 on the night of a full buck moon on which I both spoke to Abby and Ryan, each calling me concerned about the other. This note and the afterward are newer, written just a little more than a month after an accident proved the first sentence of chapter one unfathomably true. For
mm,
just a moment, I believed I knew how the story would end. I think we all did. The events of July 2021, however, kept my writing honest. This book tells Ryan's story. but only as it became known to me through my relationship with him. And that began when he met my daughter, Abby. Their connection, perhaps star-crossed and eternal, invited me to write these pages. This book, most accurately, is our story.
Wow. That's an amazing, captivating, and pulling author note. I like, hearing you talk about and read it out. And I like the fact that you mentioned in there that you had to change the names of all the characters except
Yes,
certain people, which I think it's quite impressive. That's a nice move, yeah. Thank you for reading. It's also
you're
did some
welcome.
of the things you've mentioned so far. Ryan's story, Abby's story, that of yours, and several other things mentioned so far. Very great, really. I'm impressed. Thank you so much for
Thank
sharing.
you. Thank you.
Yeah. And just in case, apart from In the Eater, do you have any other works you've authored or say currently working on? And just in case we have some viewers who are currently watching this interview and would love to get a copy of In the Eater, on what platform are they available on for purchase?
Okay, well, first of all, they are available through all the traditional distributors, Amazon.com, Barnes and Noble, independent bookstores can order it for you. So anywhere books are sold, you can also go to lebovierpublishing.com and order from there.
Yeah.
Um, and I am available on Instagram primarily is the social media that I use at c.hildebrand underscore. And as far as new work coming up, I'm still teaching full time. So
Mm.
as an English teacher teaching
Wow.
upper level kids, AP level content, I spend so much time reading their work and
Wow.
grading that I haven't been able to devote as much time as I would like. I am working on something which is actually a companion to this book,
Wow.
more
Love that.
more able to stand independently as well, though. And I'm hoping to release that within the next few months. I
Oh,
really feel like it's something that should have come out simultaneously or at least within the year. But it wasn't until after a few people began asking me for advice, I guess, or I don't know. I just felt very compelled to provide a companion in the form of a journal. And it doesn't even require that you read the book. It's a series of prompts
mm,
per chapter that I believe will very much help people do that hard work for themselves. And I've vetted it with a couple of psychologists in the know. So I'm hoping that it meets with everyone's approval and serves as a useful tool. Other than that, I'm still hopeful that I will get those books of poetry out one day. Retirement isn't very far around the
oh,
corner, so I'm hoping to do some productive writing in the next 2 years, I would say, and hopefully we'll have poetry released before then. But that is my future plan as of right now.
that's great. That's great, really. Sounds like you've got a lot on going. Hope you find some time to sleep. And thank you so much.
Yeah, and that doesn't even include the painting, but that's my luck.
Imagine. And thank you so much for sharing with us the Precious platform. And I also left a
Thank you.
link in the description part of this interview where interested viewers can get a copy of Colleen
Okay.
Hildebrand book directly on Amazon and Barnes& and Nobles on our website and also on other platform. I also left a
And
link
that's
to the social media pages for possible
Yes, I should
follow.
also mention I do have a website. I'll have to provide the link to that as well.
Yeah, yeah. So thank you so much, Colleen, for accepting the invitation to be featured in P English Literature. I must say it's more than awesome, quite exciting, very great and lovely having this conversation with you. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you. I've enjoyed it very much. Thank you.
Yeah, it's my pleasure as well.